Chapter 8. Nothing to bury. I haven't fallen into a pit. I've fallen into a damn canyon. Fox thought as he stared down at the cold, unmoving corpse. He couldn't believe the words that had tumbled out of Pepe's mouth. The whole thing felt like an overindulgence in make-believe, or doublethink, like theorizing how water is not actually wet, or night was not day, or the moon in reality a ball of cheese. The body before him wasn't his brother. His emerald eyes carefully scanned the body up and down, taking in the hair, skin, and face. For what? He was not certain. It looked just like his younger sibling. It had his lean body, his gloomy, sad face, and even the eyes were that same pale blue that always warmed whenever they gazed at him. He wasn't alone in the medical bay. The entirety of the crew was crowded behind him, waiting for his input. Farah was at his shoulder, holding tightly to him as she scrutinized the body with the same intensity. "Have you seen any difference yet?" He felt Farah's long ears tickling his face as she shook her head.
"Whatever it is, it's a perfect carbon copy."
Fox couldn't blame her for the doubt in her voice. He wondered eerily if this thing, this being, if alive would have acted and sounded similar to his brother, like some kind of perverse doppelganger. It made him shiver. He felt Farah pull him close, her chin now resting on his shoulder. He gave it a final thorough once-over, before giving up and hanging his head dejectedly. His eyes closed. He could hear the thudding of Falco's boots as he paced back and forth behind the pair. His hands were balled into angry fists. His head seemed to be on some kind of loose pivot, turning this way, and that his rage-filled stare alighting on random knickknacks around the room. He didn't need to see his old comrade to tell he was seconds away from breaking something. Pepe and Slippy were at either end of Falco's circuit. Their eyes were nervous marbles that tracked the blue avian's pacing. His shoes squeaked as he suddenly moved purposefully to the chilled body. Fox opened his eyes in time to see Falco striding up to the slab. He didn't even glance over at him and Farah as he leaned down to study the corpse. His eyes zigzagged frantically as he looked for something, anything that would indicate that the body before them was a fake. Finding none, he let out a frustrated exhale and stomped away.
"Pepe, goddammit, how can you be sure it's not him?"
Above the hush and hum of the medical bay, Fox could faintly hear the sound of a muffled scuffle, probably Pepe grabbing hold of Falco.
"You saw the video. We all did. You know something is amiss here."
There was a moment of silence that hung between the two. Fox didn't need to turn around to know they were looking at him. When it was clear he wasn't going to contribute, Falco spoke, his voice almost conspiratorial.
"All right, Pepe. All right, we're in agreement there. But we need to make sure that this theory of yours is airtight. I don't want to give him false hope."
The rest of their argument became less audible as Fox reoriented his attention back to the corpse. There had to be something. Anything that could clue them in as to its true origin. If it really was a copy of Alex, what the hell was it doing on the station? He was still wearing his brother's sweater, and he rubbed the collar on his nose, trying to drown out the dead chemical smell that hung in the air. Farah herself had her nose pressed against his shoulder, presumably for the same reason.
"Yeah, I smell it too. I ran straight to his room after bringing him aboard."
Fox nodded to himself and gave his wife a reassuring squeeze on her shoulder. He uncovered his face and again was greeted with that rank, sterile scent, like bleach mixed with spice. He felt a curious tug at his subconscious. Something was amiss here, and it wasn't just the smell. Carefully, very carefully, Fox bent down to pull the sheet until it finally rested just below Alex's navel. He again inhaled, trying to place the scent.
"What is it, Cloudy?"
Fox leaned away from the body, scratching his head in thought. "I don't know, Fair. It looks just like him, but it smells like it's been marinating in a vat of pool cleaner." Her eyes narrowed to half slits as she sniffed curiously at the body. Her face wrinkled in both confusion and disgust.
Yeah. Maybe it was put through decontamination and wasn't rinsed properly. It's happened to me a few times when the rinse cycle broke in the docking chamber.
She made a vigorous scrubbing motion above her head.
I had bleached hair for a week.
Despite the situation, Fox gave an amused snort. He looked back at the body and noticed a strange peculiarity on the stomach. The skin surrounding the belly button was red and indented, as though something had previously been pressed tight against the skin. Fox looked over his shoulder and fixed a stare at Peppy, who was amidst a hushed conversation with Falco. The pair ceased their spat and looked squarely at him.
You found something?
Peppy said, trying not to sound too hopeful. Fox waved them both over. Peppy was now at his shoulder, leaving Falco to brood by himself. The avian had begun to pace again, more languidly this time, but the feathers around the back of his head shifted and shuffled in agitation. "Did you notice this, Peppy?" Fox asked, indicating the skin mark with a finger. Peppy's eyes drifted to the spot. He shrugged indifferently.
Maybe it's a bruise left over from his flight suit belt. They often leave marks if you don't fit it properly.
It was a plausible explanation, but Fox wasn't convinced. He reached out and plucked a penlight from Peppy's lab coat pocket. He then gently laid a hand on the body's stomach, using 2 fingers to pull the skin aside, opening the belly button wider. He clicked the light on and leaned in for a closer look, Peppy following suit as well. He could see that the skin underneath had the same puffed red quality. Further still, he could see dried blood, as though something sharp had previously pierced the skin. He heard a sharp intake of breath from Peppy. He looked over to see the doctor's face had suddenly gone pale and haggard.
I've seen this before. Long ago.
Fox frowned. How long ago? What is it exactly? But Peppy looked to Rob, who was at attention at the entrance of the medical bay.
Rob, come over here. I need you to take a tissue sample. Here.
He had plucked the penlight from Fox and made a circling motion with it above the scab. The droid walked up to the corpse and inserted a needle that had sprouted from its forefinger into the wound. After a brief interval, its arm withdrew. A clicking sound emitted from its hand as the needle retracted. Its head made a muted buzzing sound as it analyzed the sample.
I have completed the scan, Dr. Hare. Were there any caveats you wish to add to the analysis?
Did the sample contain any chemical composition, similar to an amniotic solution?
The nature of the question was completely lost on Fox, but he knew Peppy would eventually translate in fewer syllables.
The chemical composition of the sample is indicative of an amniotic or synthetic embryonic solution, or at least a 85% match. The sample was diluted somewhat by the blood and tissue.
It was Farah who reacted first.
Embryonic fluid, you mean? Like the stuff that flows out of an umbilical cord.
The machine nodded its head.
Affirmative, Miss McLeod.
The droid looked left and right, as though looking for eavesdroppers. The normally nonchalant machine seemed almost unsettled. Fox waited for the droid to continue, but it simply stood at attention awkwardly. Peppy made a rotating motion with his hand.
Go on, Rob. You're within your right to speculate.
The droid's posture became more confident. However, when it spoke, it sounded almost perplexed.
Given what I have gleaned so far from the security footage of Alex's escape from the Spillman station, along with the implication of the body being exposed to embryonic fluid, it is clear that the deceased before us is not the genuine Alex, but instead a recreation from a stasis tank.
There was a long moment of stunned silence as Fox and his crew let this sink in. It was Falco's turn to speak up.
You can't be serious. How sure are you of this?
Such probability is difficult to quantify given my scant familiarity of the Spillman station and the Siphon project that served as Alex's inception. Furthermore, Dr. Hare has told me conjecture has no place in the lab.
Peppy made a cutting motion in the air.
Goldilocks. Just answer the question as best you can.
Rob relented.
I feel confident with a probability of 87%. However, in addition to my access to the station's security system, I took the liberty of analyzing the various projects being conducted by the science division aboard the station. Mr. Toad was kind enough proceeding through the proper channels to grant me access.
Fox heard a faint little snicker from Slippy. It was not lost on him that the methods Slippy obtained the classified info were nothing short of illegal. In fact, if the station's security had any inkling of the kind of techno-wizardry his ship's engineer was capable of, the great Fox would have been diverted before its nose could enter the nebula the station inhabited. What did you find, Rob? Anything worth noting? Fox asked patiently.
Based on what I've gleaned from the accumulated data, compiled with my knowledge of the Siphon project, I was unable to find any conclusive theories as to where this body originated, or the location of the apparatus that facilitated its growth. What is conclusive is that it did not originate from the station. There are no records amongst the vessel's inventory.
But it was made... in what? An incubator of some kind? Before the machine could respond, Peppy spoke up.
Before Alex was born, for lack of a better phrase, I oversaw his growth in the artificial womb he was housed in. Nutrition, cell growth, bone structure integrity, everything required to ensure the healthy future of a young boy.
His voice was tinged with sadness, as it always did when the topic came to Fox's parents.
Your mother. She was the one who first laid hands on him when we took him out of the tank.
He pantomimed cutting with scissors, with his middle and forefinger.
Your father was awarded the task of cutting the cord, and to his credit, he didn't drop the scissors that time.
He then regarded Fox with a sadness that only nostalgia could convey.
Then again, he had a little practice prior.
He felt the sentiment, and it hurt up near the heart. So much potential, so much preparation, and prospects for the future. It had been robbed from him, and there was still the capacity for more loss. The weight of it was a compounding pressure, the kind of which could break him. It was Farah who pulled him back into the light.
There's still a chance, Cloudy. We need to hold on to hope.
He could only nod vaguely. All of it should have given him hope. Instead, he felt as though some cryptic, imperceptible cord was slowly coiling around him, threatening to become a lethal garrote.
Peppy, you don't think it was alive when, you know...
Peppy simply stared at the floor, his shoe lazily scuffing the white surface in thought. He looked exhausted, too much grief, and too little sleep.
I have no way of knowing, Falco. It could have been brain dead this entire time, or it died shortly after being taken out of stasis.
There was a harsh intake of breath from Falco, as he turned away sharply.
My God, Doc. I hope it's not the latter.
He ran his hands over his face and the back of his head. When he turned back around, his face was ashen. They were all looking Fox's way, waiting for his input. He turned around and hurriedly pushed the corpse back into the frozen compartment. The other members of his crew might have had their own doubts. He, however, had none. It's not him, he said flatly, his gaze traversing across the room, locking eyes with each crew member, as though challenging any naysayers. There were none. We haven't figured out why. Call it what you will. You're open to your own speculation. A trick, an elaborate con game, or happenstance. This I know for certain. It's not him. And he's alive. 4 heads nodded solemnly in agreement. Falco, decisive as always, was the first to speak.
Well, what are we spinning our wheels for? We turn this rig around. We get our keisters into some R-wings and search for him.
Where would we even begin? If the pod launched from the station, it could be anywhere.
Slippy said. Fox turned to Peppy, who was now seated back at his desk console. He opened the drawer next to it and withdrew a lemon candy. He began sucking on it audibly. Peppy, you worked on the station with my father. Do you have any idea where the pod would have launched to?
Yes. I was for quite a few years while me and your father worked on the Siphon project.
He paused for a brief moment, seeming to shuffle and skim through the past. Fox knew he was also pondering Andros's involvement, seeming to weigh the merit of mentioning it. After all the carnage, all the destruction the exiled scientist had left in his wake, mere utterance of his name was not without stain. Better off treating him as though he never existed.
During my post aboard the station, I was made privy to a few protocols in the event of an evacuation or hostile takeover of the facility. Back then, a lot of the research and projects conducted were centered around the biological variety. There were multiple divisions, each undertaking their own respected projects. Vaccines, drug testing, antibiotic trials being the more benign. However, the station was home to the bioweapons division. The remoteness of space along with the security and secrecy of the facility made it ground zero for the upper echelon of the Cornerian military's endeavor into the offensive and defensive applications, be it disease or viral.
In layman's terms, very nasty stuff. Things you don't want ever getting out, Fox said. Peppy nodded gravely.
More than nasty bugs. Strains and microbes that could wipe out a planet's entire population or erase the Lilat War in a year's time, along with its participants. Alas, such total war tactics were considered outdated by the time me and your father began our little endeavor with your brother. By that point, the key figures in both the Cornerian Defense Force and government canned most of the bioweapons projects. Before its destruction, it served as a sort of base for reconnaissance operatives. Its proximity to the dark forest black hole cluster and Sector Y nebula gave it a perfect hunter's blind to monitor venom.
He paused for a moment, shooting his sleeve cuffs and smoothing them.
Because of the sensitive nature of the station and the vital intelligence and assets it holds, there are several contingencies in place to thwart attempts at capture of said assets.
Fox sighed audibly, for he knew Peppy was about to drop a cute little nugget of a predicament on their heads. All right, Peppy. How bad is it? When Peppy spoke again, he began making ticks with his fingers.
The most dire we don't have to worry about is self-destruction of the station. But in the event of a hostile attack, key security personnel are instructed to destroy all classified material, while operatives are instructed to make for a rendezvous point.
Falco gave an irritated snort.
Terrific. Let me guess it's someplace hospitable and well within means of travel. Do you even have a clue?
It could be in the Sector Y nebula, maybe Titania, or, most likely, the Dark Forest. It's a perfect hazardous maze to lose a tail if you have the flight data. Any pursuers would have a hell of a time chasing you.
Fox could only shake his head in bewilderment. But come on, Peppy. A life pod navigating a black hole cluster. That's suicide.
Not if the pod is capable of warp.
Peppy shot back.
Like I said, to prevent capture of classified material, protocol dictates self-destruction, deletion, or
Or it's offloaded onto a pod or vessel to be relocated to a secure location.
Farah said. Peppy favored the fennec with an approving finger wag and wink.
correct as always, Miss Long-Ears, and the Dark Forest would be at the top of the list.
Again, Fox was left dumbfounded. He really did it. He magicianed himself through a sea of black holes in an escape pod of all things. He looked to Falco, who only shrugged nonchalantly.
Seems like we have our course set. Dark Forest it is.
The rest of the crew were less than optimistic.
Such a course of action is ill-advised. The Great Fox is not equipped with sufficient chart data to navigate such a precarious environment.
Might as well fly into a minefield blindfolded.
Slippy chimed in.
Not the alternative I would suggest, Mr. Toad, but certainly one with a higher success outlook.
The machine eluded the sarcasm. Falco glowered at the droid, as though measuring its size and weight for a haul to the trash compactor. Fox knew his ace pilot well enough. It was going to take more than odds from a simple machine to deter him.
Slippy, you had access to the station's onboard databanks. Did you find anything that would help navigate the cluster?
The engineer shook his head disappointedly.
I tried just that, and I came up with squat. Any useful data was probably vaporized during the hijacking.
Maybe it was deliberate. Deleted like Peppy said.
Falco had begun to pace again for a few brief laps, then stopped as an idea occurred to him.
That major that contacted us earlier. Shears, we find him and corner him. Get what we need that way.
And you're going to persuade him how? Don't you think he'd tell us if he found something? Fox said dubiously. The feathers at the back of Falco's head shuffled in irritation.
He knows something. I'm sure of it. And we'll get it, even if I have to beat it out of him.
Before Fox had the chance to retort, Farah spoke up, and what she said stopped them both in their tracks.
Before we go off half-cocked, we need to get a firm grasp on what's going on. An entire station full of Cornerian soldiers and scientists was destroyed, along with the fleet guarding it. And we don't have a single shred of evidence of who or what was behind it. We need to tread carefully, or it might be us next that's left floating dead in space.
What do you mean we might be next? What exactly did you see aboard the station?
Farah's face betrayed no emotion. But Fox was close enough to see the unease in the sudden stiffening of her posture, along with the strands of hair that raised on the back of her neck. He gave her a comforting squeeze on her shoulder and a little nudge with his head. Go on, Fair. Tell them. For a split second, his wife's face became eerily deadpan and stoic. It was the same look she always had those sweat-drenched nights when she awoke gasping from a nightmare, staring into infinity, as the war-induced episode bled away to reality. Then he blinked and it was gone, and she looked as cool and tough as she had ever been. Farah began to speak. She spoke for a long time, recounting the wreckage, the encounter with the Cornerian Rangers, and the chaotic mess of the station's interior. There was a collective intake of breath from the crew as she described the aftermath of the massacre, the body count, the crew's wounds, and the ominous preciseness in which they were dispatched by blaster fire. It painted a gruesome tapestry of claustrophobia and death in Fox's mind, made all the more terrible knowing his wife wouldn't exaggerate the details. He wondered if he had gone instead of her, could he have held it together when the bodies pressed in around him, their stiff limbs reaching for him. He should have been at her side, not dithering about in an R-wing. Next time, be there, he reprimanded himself. Out loud, he said, Good God, all those people. All the ships guarding the station. Just gone. Falco shook his head in horror.
Yeah, they straight up slaughtered them all. Did you see anyone else? Bodies of possible attackers?
She shook her head.
No. Not a single body of anyone that might have been an attacker. Most of the security personnel's weapons were fully loaded and unfired.
The frustration in Falco's voice only grew.
You're telling me that a bunch of hijackers got past the fleet? And what? Iced how many guards and geeks before they took notice?
He looked to Slippy.
And you're telling me you didn't see any of these goons on the security cameras?
The engineer shook his head.
All no-shows, I'm afraid. It's like they were never there.
Falco spat a 4-letter curse word, then began to rub his temples.
Maybe. It was the Venomians. The station was close enough to their territory for them to launch a strike.
Huh. You're right, they have plenty of motivation. But I doubt it was them, Fox said. Not even close. After the Lilat War, only a meager amount of Venom's military was left operational, with the ceasefire between them and Corneria halting further hostilities, leaving in its place lukewarm diplomatic relations. In the wake of Andros's death and much of the rebellion's command apparatus, the remaining leaders, both political and military, opted to prioritize the rebuilding of their infrastructure, as well as endeavors into terraforming the planet's inhospitable environment into something more livable, as the population continued to swell. Still, there were a few leftover warmongers, like Andros's nephew Andrew, who saw the turn of events as the collective of Venom's brave freedom fighters, reduced to cowering traitors that once again basked in Corneria's shadow. Such relapses of armed conflict seemed unlikely. Loud and passionate voices calling to arms like Andrew's were too few and seen as the idealistic ramblings of a lunatic amongst Venom's populace. It can't be Venom. There's no way they could pull off an attack this quick and clean. Falco nodded in reluctant agreement.
You're right. Stealth and guile aren't really in the Venomian MO. You don't think it was Corneria behind this? Or the agency? Maybe the creeps wanted Alex out of the way. Maybe that's why the body was left for us to find.
Peppy was the first to shoot this down.
No. You can safely count them out as well. If they wanted Alex gone, or wanted him to disappear, why the melodrama with the attack on the station in the first place? They could have done it at a more convenient time and place, and we wouldn't have been none the wiser.
Peppy's right. This is overkill, even for the agency.
Farah said.
I think someone knew Alex was visiting the station. That same someone left the body for us to find.
They might have been already aboard before he arrived, Fox blurted. Now it was his turn to pace. Like you said, Fair, they killed the crew before they had a chance to get off a shot, but they weren't fast enough to nab my brother. So the attackers left the body, to buy themselves time to find him.
Which is why whatever course of action we take, we tread lightly so we don't tip Alex's pursuers off. Right now, he has a head start. He's more than likely holed up somewhere safe.
Falco huffed.
Sure. He's shacked up on a planet full of palm trees and exotic women. We should just leave him be.
Fox thought again to the footage he'd seen of Alex, limping away, clutching his side after being shot. The image of his brother, all by his lonesome, bleeding out, and helpless. And here they were aboard the ship, wasting precious time. But if Farah was right, the best path to his brother was the non-linear one. His musings were halted at the sound of Falco's footsteps as he made for the exit.
This is a waste of our damn time. You want to give up on Al, that's fine. Less of you to slow me down while I search for him.
Fox blinked and suddenly his wife was across the room, holding Falco's arm, stopping him in his tracks.
You'll just get yourself killed, Falco. And then what? We'll be down our best pilot.
I'm not abandoning him, Fair. We have to try. I have to try.
He tried to shrug her off, but she slammed him against the wall, both hands pinning his shoulders.
We're not abandoning him. And I'm not letting you take a risk like this.
He glanced down at Farah's hands, and Fox could see him sizing her up. He didn't have a chance. His wife was no pushover. Falco wasn't going anywhere. He had to make a decision, otherwise Falco was at risk of having a broken limb or two. That's enough. Both of you, he said sternly. Farah let Falco go, and his ace pilot stayed where he was. He took a deep breath for a count of 4 before letting it out. He had to make a decision, and lay it down with a firm hand. What he said next would be critical, even if it was foolhardy and stupid. He knew where Falco was coming from. Frankly, he felt the same desperate urge to leap into a cockpit and take his chances against a sea of black holes. But Farah was right. Everything up until this point had been orchestrated by meticulous, far-reaching hands. The only advantage they had was that whoever this chess player was, they had set up a ruse that their opponent could use to bluff them into inaction, as long as they played dumb and did their part. It didn't rule out the possibility of more game pieces being eliminated, but for now their opponents seemed content with letting them live. Your move, Fox. Make it soon, or your turn is forfeit. It was times like these he truly felt his father's absence and the need for his guidance. There's only so much I can offer you in terms of advice and philosophy when it comes to leadership. His father had said long ago when Fox had expressed his want to join the military. Sooner than later, you won't be just in charge of people's tasks and duties, but their very lives. You'll have to make decisions that aren't going to be clear and cut. Some will question you. Some will understand. Others may even grow to resent and hate you. How well you weigh your considerations to your team and your mission is not only going to define you as a leader, but as a person. The older man had leaned in close, and what Fox had glimpsed in his eyes had scooped out a little bit of what made him a kid. Those who follow leaders in war might have to die for them. It shouldn't be because of them. Do you understand the difference? He nodded. You can't keep everyone safe, and you can't gamble with the lives of good soldiers to do so. Make measured decisions within reason. During the Lilat War, when he had command of his own fighter squadron, he had to weigh the options and bear the cost. Maybe that's why his brother had chosen his lonesome career after leaving the Cornerian Rangers. Alex, for all his natural talent and skill, probably couldn't shoulder such responsibility, opting to work as a field agent, where self-reliance was the only consideration of the job. Do what you can. Don't get your whole crew killed for his sake. He folded his arms, as he always did before making a tough decision. When he spoke, his voice was firm, uncompromising. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to make preparations to land on Corneria and turn over the body for proper burial services. For all intents and purposes, my brother is dead, and we're going to play along for the long game. We play dumb as long as we can, before we make our move. Falco, in the meantime, I want you and Rob to run simulations on possible flight paths through the dark forest. Whether we get the astronautical data or not, we need to prepare for the trip, and I want my best man at the helm. Falco's posture straightened, and his jaw set in determination.
You can count on it, boss.
Fox then looked to Farah. Fair, as soon as we make it planetside, I want you to poke around and reach out to your contacts in the military. Try and get us an audience with Pepper. If there's anyone who can make sense of what's going on, it's him. Plus, we might be able to persuade him to commit some soldiers and ships to aid in the search effort. She nodded in the affirmative. Slippy, I want you to work alongside her, snoop around and monitor the traffic around the station, figure out who came and went in this region, and if you find any ships out of place, take note of it. Slippy favored Fox with a toothless, mischievous smile.
You know, I could extend my search into the CIS databanks.
Don't step on any toes, Slip. You skim and peek, but nothing too invasive yet. The engineer did a cartoonish, excited shimmy with his hips and shoulders, making Farah roll her eyes.
Don't worry, Cloudy. I'll keep his curiosity in check.
Slippy skipped out of the room with Farah in tow. After the pair left, Falco and Rob followed suit, presumably to the navigation table on the ship's bridge, to begin their virtual trials. Before he crossed the threshold into the corridor, Falco gave one last look over his shoulder.
Fox, Bud, do you think Al will be all right, out there by himself?
Again, Fox felt that creeping doubt. It was a good plan, but he couldn't shake the feeling he was abandoning his brother. He's a survivor, Falco. He's alive, and we'll find him. Stick to the plan and we'll bring him home. He nodded, but that worrisome curve to his beak still lingered as he left the medical bay. Now it was Fox and Peppy left in the room.
I assume you have a special assignment for me as well.
He turned to see the old hair still slumped in his chair, his face still haggard. Yes. And it's probably the most imperative. He rested a hand on the doctor's shoulder and waited for his eyes to meet his. More than anything, we need to figure out where the hell this clone of Alex came from, and who or what made it. Peppy inclined his head sagely.
I know, Fox. I don't like this one bit. But if we piece it together, we'll have a 50-50 chance of uncovering the true culprit.
We're on the same wavelength there, but we both know the people who have the know-how to create a being like Alex are dead. Peppy said nothing to this. He simply closed his eyes and became very still. This went on for so long, Fox had begun to believe the older man had simply dozed off.
That's that, I guess. You go on now, son. Do what you can and get some rest.
Fox made his way out of the medical bay, casting one last look over his shoulder. His father figure suddenly looked much older then, very frail and diminutive, sitting alone in his chair. Peppy, are you all right?
You made the right call, Fox. I hope you know that.
Peppy said, ignoring his question. He left then, not hearing the next words Peppy muttered under his breath.
Only a guardian to your kids, James. Not an undertaker. I promise, old friend, I won't bury your kids.